Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Sweatin' Iron.
Welcome back, everybody, to Sweat and Iron. I am Graham, your host, and if you got any sort of clue out of that introduction, you'll know what this episode is going to be about. I go up to Canada and talk to my friend John about his profession, announcing in sporting events, more specifically, wrestling competitions. That's right, he announces at wrestling matches up in Canada, but we also talk about the WCW, the WWF, the WWE, how wrestling has transitioned over time, and if you're going to be like me, this entire episode just sparked a lot of my childhood and what I saw on TV every Thursday, every Saturday, every Monday, whenever those matches were on. Oh, this was just so much fun. So, without further ado, enjoy the show. Oh my gosh, it's the Canadian out.
Oh, the Canadian twang. I never even thought.
Is that what it's called? Is it called the twang?
Can be.
Twang's a relative term.
Accent, maybe? Canadian accent, eh?
Some Americans, we call it twang too.
Okay, now, maybe before you go to the gym, can both of you collaborate on this question? Why is it that Anne of Green Gables did not have a Canadian accent?
Because she was not real.
Oh,
Did not? In what, be more specific, Graham.
well, you know, when you watch the old show, and then I guess they came out with a new show on Netflix.
So you mean the old, like, 1980s Sullivan production?
Yeah, the one where my mom had like the
Like
two
double-
VHS cassette thing going on.
I think
Yeah.
they just. Why did she not have it? Accents are so regional anyway. And the actress who played her was Megan Follows, and she was pretty classically trained. So I just assumed they wanted a more generic sounding one because Maritime Canadians one accent, out west is something different, and Newfoundland is a whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
Same as in the United States, east, west, south.
I just, there's something about the Canadian accent that's so fun, though. I don't know. It's just a fun thing to hear. I mean, it's not as like you hear the South African accent. You hear that, and you're just like, I could listen to that all day long. But the Canadian one, it makes stories fun.
Well, that's good.
I don't know. That's just me.
We'll take it.
Yeah,
I'll take it
we'll
as
take
a
it.
compliment.
Oh, it's a very big compliment. That's the weird thing about me is that Connie especially, she'll be talking to me and I'll say something and she'll just be like, I think that's a compliment. I'll say, just take it as a compliment because I meant it to, my words don't come out right. And I tell my boss all the time, I've got this figured out in my head, but it just doesn't flow well coming out.
No, that's all right.
It's either a guy thing or it's a Graham thing. And I'm going to go with Graham thing.
Yeah, either one I think will work.
All right, so let's talk about why we're here. I'm here to interview you. Do you prefer John or Jonathan?
Either one, whatever you're most comfortable. I actually go with Jonathan.
You like Jonathan?
Well, if it's John, it's Jon.
Right.
So either
So if
way.
I call you John, do I have to say, hey, John, Jon?
Nah, just John's cool.
Okay, cool.
Or either one, man. I've been called much worse, so it's all good.
Okay. Yeah. Do I want to know?
Probably not.
Okay. Well, all right. I'm actually tempted to know, but so John, we're here to talk about you. And here's the interesting thing is that this is going to be. I'm branching out from what we normally talk about. We normally cover fat loss. We normally cover, a particular area of if you work out in the gym, you stick to this kind of workout. I cover all the bases, but I've recently came to this idea with the help of other people, especially Jen, is that it'd be cool to involve people that are not necessarily involved in the sport directly, but I mean, you are, but you're not. Let's talk about what you do first. So you're an announcer, but you announce for a lot of things. One in particular that's very fascinating is wrestling.
That's right, professional wrestling. I've been an announcer for professional wrestling for almost 20 years now in Canada. Do you want to know how that got started?
I do, but tell me like where you've done it. Like, let's talk about where you've done it, and then we'll talk about how it started.
Okay, we'll slow it down a little bit. Graham, I am in Eastern Canada on an island called Prince Edward Island. It's approximately 150,000 people in our island. It's about 5,600 square kilometers, so that puts it in some context. So I've done ring announcing primarily on Prince Edward Island, but I've gone to some neighboring provinces. In Canada, we call our different sections provinces compared to you guys states, I guess. So I've announced in a couple of different provinces.
And we don't use kilometers either. So if you're an American listening to this, go to Google and use a conversion scale.
Exactly, because I don't know how to do it in my head.
Neither do I.
So a little bit in the Maritimes, primarily in my home province of Prince Edward Islands.
Nice. And you guys are in a totally different time zone than the rest of us Americans. I was originally thinking you'd be East Coast time, but you are actually 1 hour beyond that since you're maritime.
That's true. It's a time zone called Atlantic. So it's 2 hours different from you.
Yeah. So that was a little different for me because I'm used to, oh, you're an hour ahead. Oh, you're 2 hours behind me. Or occasionally I get the weird people that live in mountain time, and then that's 1 hour behind me. But now, when you said that you were in Atlantic time, I was like, what is that? Is that East Coast time? You're like, oh, no, we are in a time zone all by ourselves. And I'm like, oh, I feel so stupid that I learned something.
Well, I know you blamed it on Anna Green Gables and her red hair, but it could very well have been Anna Green Gables and her red hair.
I did. I could also blame it on American education for all I know. Or I could have just been sleeping during geography class because I hated geography class.
Yeah, well, you got to get your rest sometimes.
But I'm making up for it now because that's what this podcast is all about, my own education, whether it's learning about time zones, workouts, diets, fad diets, nutrition, you name it, I'm learning. You reside up in Prince Edward Island.
Correct.
And that's where you currently do your announcing.
Most of it, yes.
But go ahead.
Oh, no, I have went to some bigger cities when it's a special event. For example, Halifax, that's the largest city in Atlantic Canada. There's been a few times over the years where some wrestling promoters want to put on an all-star show or something special, and I'll be brought in to contribute to that in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in-ring announcing, which is what I typically do, or sometimes play-by-play. I know another time I did play-by-play and put on a Hall of Fame display in the afternoon. I've quite a memorabilia collection when it comes to professional wrestling as well.
Ooh. All right, so tell me how you've been announcing for wrestling competitions, matches for 20 years. How does somebody get started in such a thing? I mean, do you just stumble across it? Do you just show up one day and say, hey, I'd like to do this? How'd you do it?
Actually, what happened was I had a video camera, an old school video camera with tape. We're talking the late 1990s. This was long before everyone had something on their phone that they could record with. So I decided, what the heck, I'm going to take my video camera and record some wrestling matches. I thought that would be super cool. And it was. And then during the intermission, some of the wrestlers were out at what they call the merchandise table trying to sell pictures and whatnot. And one of them had my camera. He cut what's called a promo. What that means is try to sell themselves on the camera to me. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. This wrestler just gave a 30-second blurb for me on my camera, just for me. I thought that was super cool. So at the end of the show, I went and interviewed some of the wrestlers. Again, they're cutting some promos. They're talking to me kind of like you are with me. They're sharing a little bit of their stories. So I did that for a couple of years, doing a little bit of amateur videography, we'll say. Then eventually one of the promoters said, geez, man, you've been recording these for a couple of years. We'd really like to see what you got. he happened to live in Charlottetown at the time, so he said, "Look, would you come over to my house, make me a copy of the tape? I'd love to see what you have." So I said, "Cool, I'll do that." So I made him a copy of the tape, went to his house expecting just to hand him the tape and go on my merry way. He said, "Oh, come on in." Cool. Want a beer? Cool. So puts the tape in the VCR, so date me a little bit. Watch the tape, and he's like, "Oh, cool, this is really good." And what I was doing was I was doing some like a little bit of commentary when I was recording it, just kind of fooling around, having a little bit of fun. And he's like, "Geez, you're kind of good at that. Geez, if we ever get TV, would you like to do some commentating for me?" It's like, "Sweet." So then he called one of the local wrestlers who became a good friend of mine, Cowboy Mike Hughes, and he came over, watched it, and said, "Whoa, this is really good." So from then on, I started videotaping the matches for the local professional wrestling company. One thing led to another. One night the referee was unable to referee, so I jumped in the ring to referee. That's a whole other story. Then gradually I got the reputation as being able to talk a little bit. So the company in our area were doing a TV pilot in Halifax, and they needed someone to do play-by-play, and they had me in mind. And then they ended up having another guy from Central Canada. He's originally from the Maritimes. No Class Bobby Bass is his name. They brought him in instead to do it, but they were scared Bass would no-show. They brought me over as a backup and put me in the ring to do the in-ring announcing. So it was my first experience ring announcing a match inside the ring in front of about 2,000 people in Halifax. So it was quite an ordeal. Got through it, and that's how I got started.
Wow. That's pretty cool. And that camera that you're talking about, my parents used to have, it was a shoulder camera. And is this the kind of camera we're talking about? Because at that time, I don't think we even had the smaller cameras with the micro cassettes in them yet.
This would have been a smaller one, micro cassette, so it wasn't over the shoulder. It was I'm like holding it in my hand. It was you do your best to keep it steady. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but that was my in to wrestling. So then I got the reputation as being able to talk a little bit. So then when the troupe, now at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s, the company was a maritime company. So would tour through 3 different provinces, and it was going every night. It was quite big. My current gig is with a new company we started 10 years ago, or a friend of mine started it 10 years ago. And that primarily goes on Prince Edward Island. We do about 4 to 8 shows a year, and sometimes we'll go to other provinces, but they're usually a paid show, which means the promoter will put up X amount of dollars, we'll bring the show, and we get paid the same amount, whether we get 50 people or 500 people.
What's the company name?
The company's called Red Rock Wrestling.
Red Rock
Red
Wrestling.
Rock, named after red soil on Prince Edward Island.
It's named after the red soil?
Well, that's part of it. And we had one of our sponsors in the first show is Red Rock Harley Davidson. I believe that's a company in the United States as well.
Well, possibly. I mean, Harley Davidson's a big name.
Harley Davidson's a company in the United States, but Red Rock on Prince Edward Island, Red Rock Harley Davidson. That was one of our sponsors at the time. So we kind of borrowed the name from them and the red soil on Prince Edward Island.
I see. Yeah, I just pulled up the website here for you guys.
Yeah,
that looks like a tough crowd.
Pardon?
I said that looks like a tough crowd.
Roster, yeah, we try to keep them looking like professional wrestlers, and they're all very talented, all a very talented crew. Most of the crew lives within the maritime provinces. That's Eastern Canada. We have brought a few in before from different places, but it's usually when they're in the area. It's because it's very expensive to fly in talent.
Mm-hmm. What was the wrestler's name? The cowboy?
Cowboy Mike Hughes is the owner of the company. He's the one who got me I owe a lot to him. He got me involved in professional wrestling, and again, we became friends at our mutual interest in professional wrestling. And then we have developed a good friendship since. Actually, he was in my wedding, and I had 2 wrestlers as my ushers in my wedding. The other one is Brody Steele. You can see it on the website. Brody Steele is 6'6", about 300 pounds of muscle. He has drawn crowds of over 70,000 people in India. He is a huge star in India. Actually, he's huge internationally. He has a presence like few other people I've ever met and ever seen in the world.
That's actually pretty cool
And
to
Ian
say.
Calvin.
I had a bunch of wrestlers at my wedding.
I played a card that I had. No, Brody Steele's real name is Peter Smith. He lives in Moncton, New Brunswick. Great guy. And Cowboy Mike Hughes lives in Prince Edward Island too. So they're two of my oldest and dearest friends in professional wrestling. And I was getting married in 2017. And I said, boys, would you do me the pleasure? And they both accepted. So it was pretty cool.
Wow. So you announce for this stuff. I would imagine being an announcer in the wrestling ring, you'd want to be somewhat fit to, because you got to move around with the guys, right? You got to get out of their way. Right? Because your announcing takes place in the ring, or are you outside the ring? Are you both? How does it work out?
Now, there's two different things. One is the in-ring announcing. So it's like, all right, in this corner, weighing in at 195 pounds, Graham and his opponent. Da, 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 da. So you do that introduction and then get out of the ring, and then the wrestlers do their match.
195
in-ring
pounds.
announce.
195 pounds is my goal, by the way, at some point.
I have no idea what you look like or what your physique is like, so I just threw that out there.
Oh,
I'll
go for it.
We'll go for that. So I'd introduce you and your opponent, and then out of the ring, the referee's in there with the two guys. They do their match. Then I would go to a table beside the ring or, well, outside of the ring, and sometimes do play-by-play.
Okay.
Actually, truth be told, little wink, wink, a lot of our play-by-play is done post-production.
Okay.
So that would be, but normally if I was to do, I have done live play-by-play before, but usually that would be well away from the ring.
Okay. But so have you ever
Did that
in WWE or referencing back to WCW when that used to be a thing? All the wrestling that you see on TV. You guys are more of now it's Canadian wrestling, but is it also kind of like an indie company? It's like an independent, or what do they call that? Enterprise.
Yeah. Well, I guess an independent wrestling promotion, same thing as in the United States. We would fall into that category. We've had some guys who have gone on to WWE. One guy currently, our very first show had a guy named Gurvinder Sira. He's currently wrestling in WWE. He's one of the Singh brothers with I can't remember the guy's name, but yeah, he's currently on the roster. Another guy I worked with years ago, when I first started out in a company called Real Action Wrestling, is Bobby Roode, and he's currently in WWE. I don't know. Do you follow wrestling at all?
Off and on. It's been. I kind of gave up on wrestling over the past, I don't know, 5 to 8 years, because it just turned into, at least here in America, it just turned into the same old thing. I don't know. It never. It used to be so good, entertainment wise, and when I just remember when I was a little kid, you had Hacksaw Jim Duggan, you had Jake the Snake, you had all those guys before they started falling apart physically and mentally, and it was. I feel like the late '80s up until the mid '90s was like the time for wrestling, and then it kind of transitioned into something else. Like the wrestlers used to be a nice mix of body types, physiques, and you didn't always have the chiseled ab look going on. You had the guys that had the, you'd have a barrel belly, you'd have variety, right? And now I just feel like they're kind of cookie cutter. They at least here in the WWE.
That is a great analogy, Graham. I couldn't have said it much better myself. I'm very impressed, actually. 100%. The 1980s were the first real boom of professional wrestling. The early 80s, Hulk Hogan, a name synonymous with the Americana, really.
Yep.
He was the man in the mid 80s. They had Cyndi Lauper, the Rock and Wrestling Connection, and that went till about the late 80s, like you said. There was another resurrection in the late 90s. A guy, I'm sure you've heard the name, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
when he came up, and he had a feud with Vince McMahon, the actual owner of WWE at the time and currently, and that revitalized it to heights it's never been since. And they had a guy by the name of Dwayne Johnson came up. He was known as The Rock, and going simultaneously with Steve Austin. That was the second boom period, and that kind of started to die down in 2001, 2002. And
Yep.
I agree with you. It really hasn't been the same since. And
Yeah, kind of fizzled
the
out.
direction they went, taking like the different body. Well, and one of the reasons is the same thing you called it, man. Different body types, and that's what I liked about the 1980s. And heck, even in the second boom period, the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody didn't look the same. Everyone wasn't lean with a six pack. If you remember from the 1980s, King Kong Bundy, you remember that name?
Yep.
The guy was 450 pounds, 6'5". Nothing lean about King Kong Bundy, but no less of an attraction, no less of an effective wrestler. You names Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jake the Snake. There were two names that you mentioned. Neither one of them chiseled, but both of them looked like professional wrestlers. Both of them very good at what they did.
Oh yeah, they had the nice broad shoulder look, the big arms. There was this other guy. I'm having a really hard time thinking of his name, but he wore a leather mask. Later on, he took the mask off and he became somebody
And
else.
you're referring to Mick Foley, Mankind?
That's it, Mankind. Thank you, thank you. That made it interesting because he would always pop out and you'd be like, "What is going on? Is he really?" Because you think about this and you'd be like, "Is he really? Does he really act like that outside the ring?" And then finally, they just took that persona away from him and just made him Mick Foley more like a badass biker kind of guy.
Not even. He was more like your buddy on the couch.
Oh yeah,
Your pal down the street. He was when you talk to Mick Foley, and actually he's a best-selling author. He's written like 2 or 3 books that were bestsellers, maybe even more. He's a very smart guy. And his like you talk about body type. With that body type, he was really an anomaly. He really shouldn't have risen to the success that he did with his body type. But I mean, he had passion. He was a risk taker, and But what was so important is he connected with the crowd. He connected with the people, and that's what made Mick Foley the star that he is.
that's true. Yeah, when they took off his mask and he started connecting with the audience on a very personable level, and then he became the guy that everybody was rooting for.
Absolutely.
And
In
then,
fact, I'll share you a little tidbit of a story. The night he won the WWF at the time heavyweight championship, the show was pre-taped. So the rival company, you mentioned the name WCW, they were running live that night, but they had the results of the match that was being taped shown on WWF. So their commentator was told to mock, all right, don't dare change the channel. Mick Foley, who was a mid-carder over here, is winning their belt. Ha, ha, ha. You know what ended up happening? The shows were running simultaneously. The WCW made that snarky shot to Mick Foley. They ended up losing audience who switched channels to watch Mick Foley win his belt. So that's a testament to how popular Mick Foley was at the time.
oh wow, wow.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I find about wrestling is that you have the good guy, you got the bad guy. And sometimes the bad guy can transition into the good guy, kind of like they have a story arc, And I've always wondered, who is it that comes up with this stuff? Is it the company, or is it a mixture of the company and the wrestler? Does the wrestler reach out to the company and say, "Hey, I got this great idea of where we could go with my character"? Do you know much about that background?
Yes, I do. In professional wrestling, we have what's called a booker. At least old school professional wrestling. With us, it's Cowboy Mike Hughes, and I have a bit of a say in that too. I do. Our booker, for instance, will have an idea. Always works better when you run it by a couple people and say, all right, this will work because ABC, or this wouldn't work because ABC. And then but ultimately it's up to the booker to decide whether to go for it. The booker will know know the mechanics of how wrestling works, and have an idea in his head what, okay, maybe so and so is naturally a nice person. They might be successful as a good guy, or the opposite. Maybe a guy we're portraying as a fan favorite is a really sarcastic person and might be very effective as a bad guy. So we'll come up with a storyline or what we call an angle in professional wrestling to make the switch, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's the audience that will decide. But if it's done correctly, the booker or promoter can make it happen.
So the booker is paying attention to how the audience is reacting during the shows. They take notes, and then they think ahead. Okay, if I do this, it's kind of like choose your own story, like choose the path you want to take.
It is, but you know what the goal is?
I'm going to guess money, but what?
It would take money. You want to get butts in the buckets, asses in the seats. That's the goal. You want to draw more people in. And the best way to do that is to get a compelling, what we call storyline or an angle, to get the people to want to come and see more. At the end of the show, the key is to leave them wanting more.
Yeah. So let's go back to your announcing. We're going to kind of bounce back and forth here. Back to your announcing. So you do ringside play-by-play. You do when they come in. Do you get any gym time in? Do you try to stay in shape so you can do all this stuff?
I do try to stay in shape for me, not just for professional wrestling, not just for. I do it for me. I'm 42 years old. Just want to stay healthy, so I do try to get some gym time in. Not currently, not as much as I would like to. The gym I was going to moved, and it's kind of in a transition period at the moment. But I'm looking forward to getting back into a better routine. When I did go for a routine, it was I enjoyed lifting weights. Just lifting medium to heavy. You're using the pulleys, loose free weights, benches, typical guy upper body stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like to supplement that with a little bit of cardio, walking. I really enjoy walking with my wife. In the spring and summertime, Prince Edward Island has a lot of nice trails.
So you like to lift weights in your gym, which is great. That's always a great way to stay in shape because building lean muscle is a great way to burn calories longer over an extended period of time. And then you back that up by doing long walks with your wife in the spring.
Yeah, that is.
How many gyms are in your area?
How many gyms? That is a good question. I would say we have quite a few per capita. We have is Good Life Fitness in the United States as well. Okay, we have one of those, which is huge, and it's got a lot of fancy equipment. The one I go to is Naturally Fit, run by a friend of mine, Jason Mosier. He sponsors our professional wrestling company, so and I really like that. It's old school, it's gritty. He likens it to. Are you a Rocky Balboa fan? Rocky fan?
Oh yeah. He says he's America.
Rocky would train us. Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite characters in movies too. So he said, Rocky would train with us because it's old school, it's gritty, it's not necessarily the fancier equipment, whereas Drago would go to somewhere with the fancier equipment like Good Life with all the fancy machines and whatnot. So that's a good analogy of a comparison. I mean, it's still not knocking our gym at all. It's got some.
I thought you said something
else.
No,
I'm saying Drago would go to the protagonist in Rocky IV. He would go to the fancier one with all the fancy technology, whereas Rocky would go to Naturally Fit, which would have the old school, grittier, more small scale approach.
Yeah, small scale, old iron, older equipment. And here in the United States, what we have is you got the big conglomerate of Peak Fitness. There's LA Fitness. There's another one. But you've also got Anytime Fitness, which Depends on the town you're in. There could be some big gyms for Anytime Fitness. It's the gym I belong to, but the one that I go to is actually kind of a smaller gym. I like it. It's one of the smaller ones in town, and the reason why I like it is because with it being so small, I can gauge which days are better to go on and times. So with it being
Hmm.
Saturday, usually the peak times at my gym are between 9 a.m. and about noon, and then it'll slow down and pick back up about 12:30. And then I like to go, if I'm going to go to the gym on a Saturday, I like to go between 8 and 9 or sometime after 2 o'clock, because then I know everybody's got their workouts in and they're ready to, because Saturday you want to get your workout in so you can go out and party later that night, right? So since I'm a since I'm a parent and we stay home most of the time, I don't have any partying to do, so I just work out later most of the times.
Yeah, no, definitely. You get your routine in. You get what times work. As I said before, I teach in the public school system. So sometimes if I can leave at the end of the day after doing my work, leave at 3:30, quarter to four, I can get to the gym before the after work rush gets there, so I can get most of my routines in before it gets a little busier. So
Have
totally can relate to that.
Have you ever worked out with any of the wrestlers?
Yeah, my buddy Cowboy here, who I talked to before, and Jason Mosier, the owner and head trainer at the facility. I worked out with them once a couple of years back, and oh my Spock, oh my God, I could really move for a
Did you say,
week.
"Oh my
It
Spock"?
yes,
That's
throw out that
awesome.
tribute to Leonard Nimoy.
Put it this way, he couldn't even open the window. His arms were that sore.
Did you hear that one?
I thought she said she was going to the gym. Did she mean your home gym or the actual gym?
Yeah, we have a little home gym in the back.
Oh, so she did.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what.
she's been back there this whole time.
Yeah, that's in the.
No, I
It's
was
a
in the
couple
gym.
couple rooms away. Couple rooms.
Oh,
I'm in our living room. Our garage is just off the living room, so
I
that's where
thought
she
she was
was.
creeping
So
back
she did
there.
go away for a bit. Oh no, actually, she was actually being pretty good for a little bit. I'm sure she'll start some creeping now.
Yeah,
But
now
yes,
that
to answer
we
your
now that we're
question,
talking about her.
yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, yes, I have worked out with some of the wrestlers before and some of the bigger ones. My friend Cowboy is 6'6", about 260, 265. He's a big man.
Oh, he's a big
So
guy.
maybe I wasn't doing exactly the amount of weights that he was doing. Oh, he's huge. And he's traveled the world too. Um, so yeah, I've worked it with them, and yeah, you try to do what they're doing, but no, you're not gonna be able to do the same amount of weight. I'm 5'7", a soft 190. So, and when I
Oh,
was a little leaner, maybe 10, 15 pounds lighter, I no, you're not gonna be able to keep up with a big man like
oh
that.
no, I wasn't thinking that you'd be doing the same workouts as them, but I would imagine that with you working out next to them, even if I was working out next to them, I mean, I'm in pretty good shape now, and I like the way I'm starting to look, and it's taking years of working out and figuring out what's what, and how to eat right for one thing, because if you don't have your
Diet's so important.
if you don't have your nutrition under control and you don't know how your body's going to react to certain foods and whatnot, going to the gym, sure, you'll be getting fit and everything, but you might not be getting that appearance that you want right away, because it's like a puzzle. You got to figure out, okay, I got to tweak
No,
this over
absolutely.
here, I got to do this over here. But no, I was just thinking, if you ever worked out with the wrestlers, not so much did you work out the same workouts or the same amount of weight, but I would imagine that it would be pretty awe-inspiring to see them do the workouts that they're doing. I've never been around a wrestler when they're working out, and I can only imagine that they just annihilate whatever they're working out.
Oh, certainly can, and you are right. It is inspiring if to get those last couple reps in. You know, you want to look strong beside your friends, and if your friends are old school professional wrestlers, yeah, you want to look impressive, or maybe not look impressive. You just don't want to look as bad next to them. Maybe
Do,
impressive is a little bit of a stretch.
You know what kind of training regimen they do? Is it like, when you hear The Rock says that he basically trains all day, right? I think he goes to bed at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, wakes up at 2 or 3 in the morning, starts training. He does like a morning training, then he eats. He does whatever he needs to do during the day, and then he comes back later at night and works out another muscle later at night. Do these guys that you work with, do they just train all day long, or do you have any idea?
Well, I can tell you no, they do not. Or the guys in our my friend Cowboy, for instance, no, he wouldn't train all day long because what we Cowboy I know has a day job as well.
Okay.
Like he doesn't tour all the time. Uh, the other friend I was talking to you about, Brody Steele, I know he's working more full time in professional wrestling at the moment, but there's only there's limits in what you can do for time. But no, I know Brody Steele would be probably daily. Cowboy would be pretty close to daily, but we're talking one workout a day.
Sure, sure, sure.
And
Yeah, like one session.
so that makes a difference too when you're a little in your recovery time.
Yeah, recovery time. Yeah, unless you're popping, you know, roids, which
Yeah,
these days you never know if people are on them because nobody likes to talk about it, but you know it's out there. Uh,
absolutely. And well, I mean, you just follow UFC and all the drug testing they're doing for that.
Yeah, the drug testing out there, it's not just roids is such a broad term now. You used to think that it was just a particular drug, right? You'd be like, "Oh, are you on steroids?" Yep. Now it's boosting testosterone and other stuff, and it's like cocktails, and there's all these loopholes, and the companies keep trying to keep up with these loopholes.
Masking agents
What was that last one?
to hide it. Masking agents to cover up what you've been taking.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. I didn't know there's masking agents. People are able to, because when I'm thinking of masking agents, I'm thinking of person's been drinking and cop pulls them over and there's all these, uh, you know, take a breath mint. It'll totally throw off the cop from knowing you've been drinking, this kind of thing. Is that kind of analogy right there?
Well, I think a bit more sophisticated than that, but again, I could be outdated in what I'm thinking of too. I mean, like you said, steroids have come a long way from the back knee and the mood and the roid rages. Like I said, it's a whole conglomerate of things now.
I do
But
know
no,
that. Oh, I was just going to say that I'm going to be doing an interview, or I'm lining up an interview with. I've got one person who doesn't want to be on the microphone to talk about it, so I've got a questionnaire that they filled out and gave back to me, and then I got another person I'm trying to link up with, and he's going to be called Mr. X, and he's going to talk about his roid usage, and it's interesting to hear the feedback I'm getting so far from these people as far as why they do it, how they get away with doing it, and most of the time it's because the competitions don't test for it, and it's fascinating that what not not the negative. I'm not focusing on the negativities per se because these people have probably all heard everything and anything already, and they have responses ready to go for why do you do this? It's just fascinating what drives people
hmm
to get that goal, no matter what the consequences are.
yeah, no, absolutely. Like professional wrestling, we talked about the 80s and the heyday. Uh, that was I'd say 95% of the guys were on the steroids, whether they had the traditional steroid build or not, because another reason they were on it was for the recovery from you taking the bumps and the impact of in the ring. And not only that, the traveling too, to be able to do that with limited gym time, or irregular gym times. Steroids were used to maintain their muscle and speed up the recovery from their injuries. And of
Yeah.
course, some of it was to have those larger than life physiques.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast. It was I don't know if you've heard any of my other episodes, but More recently, I've been talking about this podcast that I really enjoy, and it's called Crime in Sports. And they talk about, they take an athlete. Usually, they prefer to take athletes who are unknown and cover their life from the time they started doing the sport to the time they got arrested. Sometimes they're still in jail, sometimes they're still in sports. It depends because each story is different. Like one time they covered Darren Sharper. Another time they covered an MMA fighter from Canada who wasn't really well known, but the uh, one or two episodes ago they did one on Razor Ramon, and
Yes.
it was a fun episode to listen to for me because it was a giant flashback to my childhood. I heard all these names that I haven't heard in. I'm 34 now, so I'm going to say I had to have been 10 years, around 10 years old, because it would have been 92 to 94. So, what? Where are we at now? What year are we on? 2019. So quite a while. And I'm listening to this podcast, and they're talking about Hacksaw Jim Duggan. They're talking about Jake the Snake. They're talking about the Undertaker. They're talking about Diamond Dallas Page. All these big names that you haven't heard of, and how they're all connected. And in the middle, well, they're talking about how in the middle is Diamond Dallas Page, because he seems to be like the backbone to a lot of these guys right now, trying to keep them intact in all ways possible. And because a lot of these guys, as I found in the podcast, they get addicted, as you said, roids. They get addicted to pain pills. They got addicted to stuff like Xanax. And so they got the uppers, and then they're so on the uppers that they need the downers just to sleep.
Absolutely. Yep. No, it was the life. It was the lifestyle back then of being on the road. You like I know when I've DJ'd or I've done a wrestling show, you come home after it, you're tired, but your mind is still wired. You're still up. So, but you have to catch a plane early in the morning. Not that I have taken downers or uppers because I don't travel on that level. Yeah, sometimes you need something to put you to sleep. Wake up in the morning, you need something to keep you up to get you to the airport, to the next town, to the next building to perform. And then that's the cycle. And then when you stop doing that, your body's still addicted to these medications. And yeah, that's the story behind that. Diamond Dallas Page, he has a thing called DDP yoga.
Yep.
He's been doing that to help rehabilitate, so to speak, or some of these wrestlers like Jake the Snake. Jake the Snake Roberts was in really bad shape before Diamond Dallas kind of detoxed him a little bit and got him back into shape with, or at least in maybe not wrestling shape, but at least comfortable living shape with his DDP yoga. And I know we tried the same thing with Scott Hall. Razor Ramon, I'm not sure how that panned out, but there's documentaries on the resurrection of Jake the Snake that involved a lot of Diamond Dallas Page's work. No, so he's certainly a success story from some of the not so pleasant stories about wrestlers and coming down.
Yeah, they said that I guess Jake he couldn't walk at some point. He was having problems walking because he was in such horrible condition. But Scott Hall, aka Razor Ramon, has just had an on again, off again drinking problem that has caused him to have many public occurrences.
Public embarrassments, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, but you know what? Even though that is the case, I'm still going to remember him as the oiled-haired, slicked back with the toothpick sticking out of his mouth, going, "Hey, you know, hey, how you doing?"
No, Scott Hall was one of the very best at what he did. He was about 6'7", about 290 pounds, and he had the body, the charisma. Oh, he was one of the best, no doubt about it.
Did you hear the story about how Razor Ramon became Razor Ramon?
I believe it had something to do with a Scarface impersonation, or I think it was Al Pacino from Scarface.
Yeah.
And they came. If you know it better, go ahead.
It was actually revealed in this podcast I listened to, and it was fascinating because Diamond Dallas Page would hang out with Scott Hall. I can't remember who all was in the group, but there was like 3 or 4 of them that they went to a restaurant, a diner somewhere, and Diamond Dallas Page said, "Hey, let's all put toothpicks in our mouths and see how we look and walk around with them, and maybe we'll use them in the show." And before you knew it, they all put toothpicks in, but the only person who kept the toothpick in their mouth was Scott Hall. And this was after he incorporated. This is later though. That's how the toothpick came about. So it just turned into his trademark with the toothpick, and it was all because Diamond Dallas Page said, "Hey, let's all put toothpicks in our mouths." So that's how that started. The other part was he's not a natural black haired guy. He's got was he a brown or something like that? He's brown haired, and so Diamond Dallas Page was telling him, "Hey, you want to look good? I think you should dye your hair black, and I think you should do a line from Scarface." And so he dyed his hair black, did the line from Scarface, like "Say hello to my little friend," and did this in front of McMahon. But McMahon had apparently never seen Scarface. He just thought that it was amazing. So he said, "That's it. This is it. This is how we're going to do your character." And then Diamond Dallas Page came up with, I think it was Diamond Dallas Page also came up with Ramon. He said, "Name yourself Ramon." And then he took Razor Ramon because of the toothpick.
Yeah. Yeah, and the alliteration, the RR. Razor Ramon.
Yeah, it's hilarious because they're like, here's this guy. He's not even Hispanic or Spanish or whatever he was supposed to be, and he's as white as you can be.
Well, if you follow professional wrestling, Diamond Dallas and Scott Hall worked together in WCW, and Scott Hall had a character that just started to have the genesis of Razor Ramon called the Diamond Stud. That was his character. And it wasn't completely Razor, but you start to see the greased back. I forget if he had the toothpick, but he had some of the Razor mannerisms. So that was an evolution.
But they were saying how back in the day, Diamond Dallas Page was always a mastermind when it came to people having trouble with what they were doing as far as their character. Diamond Dallas Page would just sit there and just be like, "Do this, just change this." It would just be like change one thing, and then bam, they became phenomenal in their act.
Yeah, no, Diamond Dallas was a manager before, like a wrestling manager before he became a wrestler. He was actually quite late starting to be a in-ring wrestler. He was probably maybe your age, 34 when he started. So he was certainly an anomaly. Certainly what shouldn't have been as successful as he was, considering the limited in-ring time that he had. But he worked his butt off, and like you said, he had a great mind for it too, and got some good breaks and made the most of it. So
you're right, though. He didn't have a lot of ring time, did he? Thinking back at that, he wasn't around that much. But now it's like you hear his name, you're like, oh yeah, Diamond Dallas Page. Which, of course, he's getting more famous now because of the yoga. But
yeah. But no, he came around during that second boom period of the late 1990s or into the early 2000s with WCW. They gave him a big push. And again, they gave him the ball. He was able to carry it for a bit. Earned a spot for sure.
So thinking back to the glory days of wrestling. Now, I'm saying glory days because, I mean, wrestling can always have another boom. I think it's just, we just got to wait for that time period. It could be tomorrow. It could be next year. Who knows? But thinking back to it, who were your favorites? I mean, I know it's really hard to pick just one, but could you make a top 5?
Favorites or who I think were the best?
Ooh, that's an even better question. So can we do your favorites and then top 5? Best?
They're pretty close. Favorite would have to be Hulk Hogan. That's the name synonymous with professional wrestling. That's what got me into the mainstream professional wrestling. We had an organization around here, Atlantic Canada Grand Prix Wrestling, before I was introduced to cable, which they were very good too. But the WWE Glam show with Hulk Hogan leading the way, that's what captured my imagination. So Hulk Hogan was for sure my favorite. I enjoyed Kurt Angle. as well. Bret the Hitman Hart was the Canadian guy I enjoyed. Roddy Piper.
Oh yeah.
Was right there. Uh, in the ring, it's kind of a bad word to say in professional wrestling. Chris Benoit was as talented as they come.
Why is that?
You know,
Why is that bad?
well, the ending of the Chris Benoit story, he was in the news at probably about jeepers, maybe 14 years ago. Murder suicide with his wife and child, due to well, no one knows exactly why for sure, but it's been attributed to head injuries and so obviously mental health problems too. So that was the demise of Chris Benoit when he was in the news a while back. I don't know if you remember it.
I think I recall hearing that, and
Wife,
wow.
and then suicide himself. But in the ring, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the favorites I'll throw out there.
You know what? You brought up a good thing that I did want to focus on, and that was head injuries. There are so many sports out there where it requires contact.
Mm-hmm.
And in wrestling, these guys, they're jumping off the highest point of the ring. Sometimes, depending on if they're, I don't know if the company that you work for, the Red Rock Wrestling does this, but the cage matches where they climb at the top of the cage and fall down all the time. I mean, these guys are basically stuntmen.
Mm-hmm.
And stuntmen use and abuse their bodies. That's how they make their money.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or you could better say it, they're the leading actors doing their own stunts.
Yes, that's a perfect way of saying it, because they don't have anybody doing their own stunts. They're doing their own stunts. They're acting and they're doing their own stunts. How has wrestling come since late 80s as far as preventative care for these guys and being on the lookout for making sure these guys aren't going to be overdoing it, concussions and whatnot?
Well, I'll switch your timeline around a little bit since the late 90s, early 2000s. They have done some measures, like we're talking the WWE, to eliminate the chair shots to the head. That's something that was in our regional promotion. When I first got into it in the early 2000s, hardcore wrestling was in vogue, and a lot of those guys took lots of shots to the head. My buddy Cowboy's had multiple concussions, again by going hard to entertain the people. So you're going into what preventative measures have been done. I think we're learning, especially from the Chris Benoit incident, where you might not want to blame it all on head injuries, but I think, according to my research on it, that was what we could be attributed to it. I guess there was an autopsy done. His brain was analyzed, and it was likened to an 80-year-old man with dementia, like a similar brain. So to me, that's your link right there. You don't blame it on steroids, roid rage, or whatever. I mean, there was definitely head injuries there. So get back to your question. What are they doing to prevent it? Trying to eliminate these chair shots as part of the storyline, part of what you do to get your match over. And I know we don't use the chair shots to the head. The safest way to do it is to the muscular part of the back. It makes a big impact, and you can what we call sell it. You can fake it like you hit the back of the head, but it's much safer on the back.
I have noticed Jen shared some of your videos with me from YouTube, and I have noticed that if there is a chair in the ring, they've been aiming for the back or another, or even legs or whatever. They don't go for the head. So that's fascinating.
Because I mean, I tell my friend Cowboy and Brody Steele, those two, I say, guys, be safe. Like if they go on tour, if they've been to Japan, I'll message them, safe travels, be safe, because I want us to be able to sit around as old men and reminisce about the good old days. And I want us to be able to cognitively reminisce about the good old days too. I want you to be there, and I also want you to be there cognitively too.
That's great that you have such a good relationship with the people that you work with.
It helps.
Yeah. I mean, if there's anything to be said about where you work, it's always great to have that connection. And they get so close with them. And talking to you about this, it really makes me want to watch wrestling again, even if it's the older, I don't know if Amazon Prime or Netflix has any of it on there, but I'd love to just watch an old match right now.
Yeah, and Graham, when I go to grab WWE, or I still like to call it WWF, it's something for the 80s or the late 90s. I don't have much interest in the current product. I will, if someone will give me a copy of a download of a pay-per-view, I might watch a couple matches. And for some of the reasons you mentioned, like the physiques are cookie cutter. It's
Yeah.
so sanitized. It's so written. It's so scripted. Whereas in the late 90s, and the way we do it, like we do backstage interviews too, and I tell the guys, all right, this is the points I want you to hit. I want it to be you. I want it to be your character, and it comes across as so much more credible, so much more believable than trying to memorize someone else's words.
Oh
And then
yeah.
makes the believability in the people, the crowd getting more invested in it. Because if you're not believing what you're selling, the crowd's not going to believe it either,
No.
and then they're not going to come back.
One of the since we're talking about side by side or not side by side play by play, one of the guys that I recall from wrestling was Jerry the King Lawler,
Mm-hmm.
and how I remember just thinking that the guy was very obnoxious. But the older I got, the more I was just like, what kind of stupid thing is he going to say today at ringside about the wrestlers? Because he would always make these little, like, he would make fun of the wrestlers. And then if a wrestler heard him making, heckling him, he'd quickly, I mean, the guy usually wound up being, I know that he was a wrestler and he went from wrestling to doing the announcing and stuff like that. But he still got involved in, the wrestlers would pick him up, slam him to the ground, make it look like he was getting beat up and everything. And that added to the entertainment. Not that I'm saying that you should get beat up, but it definitely added to it.
You wouldn't be the first one to suggest that, but no, I'd rather stay on the microphone. But no, echo what you said. Jerry Lawler was super great at what he did, both as a wrestler. I mean, he did the whole bit with Andy Kaufman in the early '80s, then came to WWE as the humor side of the commentary. You might not have, like you said, you might not have appreciated at the time, but how you see how the announcing teams are now, it's just so sanitized and so little of their actual personality coming through. You really appreciate the talent Jerry Lawler had back in the day.
Oh yeah, because Jerry, it was all. I mean, I felt like it was more improvised. Like he was really like just on his feet, trying to think of what he's going to say next. A lot of the guys now, it's just so scripted. It's like they're reading off cue cards and they got to remember what they got to say next, or it's all for, I don't know. It just seemed like it was pure talent, and now it's just let's find a guy who can just announce for us and help us make some money and not be original.
Well, this is it. They toe the line. Like the guy I do play by play with, his name's Brian Langell, super talented. And when we started, and he's some experience into it. He works for a company in Moncton, which is the neighboring province, but he happens to live in Charlottetown, which is our capital city. And they got us together, and we just with no prep time, no nothing. We just all right. We all we said was all right, because I was the play-by-play guy. He's going to do the color. I said, look, I'll drive and throw the ball to you. And we just improvised back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it was like, wow, that turned out really good. I'm not trying to put us both over, but it like without overthinking it, over rehearsing it. And that's how we do it. We don't plan it all. We don't really preview what we're going to do. We just kind of go with it and try to make it as entertaining as possible.
And sometimes that's the best way to do it. I mean, it's hit or miss sometimes, but sometimes you really it's a big hit.
Oh, absolutely. We did a sponsorship video to thank our sponsor, a little skit on Christmas time, and we got quite a few views online, and people coming up to us. How long did you guys practice that? Practice it. We just I had a template, and we just kind of went with it, like improvised it. So, and that's what I think you got to do. Even if you fumble the odd word, it seems more authentic than properly enunciating your words that clearly show no feeling. That's the way I like liking it too.
So, John, I think we did a good job of covering this for now, and we're at the end of the episode. I'd really like it. I'd like it if you could just end us on. Give us a good announcer ending here.
Okay. Well, what do you call your show?
Sweat and Iron, Fitness and Nutrition Podcast.
Sweat and Iron. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Sweat and Iron. Did I say that right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. All right, John, thank you very much for that outro. And for all you listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If I hope it did the same thing as it did, for you that it did for me. I had a lot of flashbacks, a lot of good memories pop up during this episode, and it's been a very fun one. So, John, thank you very much. And to all you listeners out there, you keep setting your goals and you keep at it.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Graham. This was a lot of fun.